those that are not able to attend. So welcome, you know, in the insane time we live, it's really lovely to be able to be in this room together collegially and with our hearts. And we're really, really happy. And we particularly want to welcome Charlotte and Dae today, who are going to share their work with us from, you know, different parts of the world. So without much ado, I don't think, Leanne, is there anything else that we wanted to say to start? No. So we're just going to start. So it's my pleasure to welcome Charlotte Baker, who is a professor of French and Critical Disability Studies at the University of Lancaster. She's one of the people that have founded and are leading the Sub-Saharan African Inclusive Network. And she has numerous publications. But the ones that I've particularly been engaging with is her work around representations of albinism in fiction, but also in African, you know, lived experiences. And it's also lovely to draw in her Francophone African work, because we've been working in a very Anglophone context. So we're going to start with Charlotte, and then Leanne has the pleasure of introducing Dae afterwards as our second presenter. So Charlotte, shall I pull up your PowerPoint, or would you like to begin and then let me know when you'd like that in?
No, I think it could come up now. That would be great, because the landing page will introduce me and the project. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, great.
So, and you'll have to tell me if this is working. Yeah, can you see it?
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just going to mute my own laptop so that it doesn't interrupt me as I'm speaking. There we are. Okay. So thank you very much, Leanne and Yvette, for welcoming me to speak today. It's a pleasure to share our work with your network. So our project is called Alternative Explanations, Disability Inclusion in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's been funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the United Kingdom and by the Global Challenges Research Fund. And we can talk more about funding later, perhaps. I was very fortunate that our funding wasn't withdrawn, as it was for many other projects at the time when we were starting this off. So I've had 4 years funding. It's just come to an end, and so now we're thinking about next steps for our work. So this project was initially a 2-year project funded by the AHRC, and it's a collaborative networking project. So it involves academic partners, disabled persons organisations and NGOs. And we've worked mainly in Cameroon, Nigeria and South Africa. And as Yvette said, I'm a Francophone specialist, so I've worked really with French and with English and with colleagues speaking those languages. Although we have, when we were doing interviews, we also interviewed in local languages or pidgin that was accessible to our participants. Okay, so if we could go on to the next slide. So I've worked with a research team with an academic lead in each country. So there have been 4 of us altogether. Myself in the UK, my colleague Elvis Imafidon, who's the Nigeria lead, and he's from Ambrose Ali University, and during the project moved to take up a post at SOAS at the University of London. In Cameroon, Dr. Imelda Ngufa Samba, and in South Africa, Professor Cobus Moolman. Now, the reason I wanted to show this slide is to give you a sense of our research team's makeup, because we're all based in the arts, in some way, arts and humanities, so philosophy, theatre, creative writing. We've worked with research assistants in each country who bring other expertise to the project. And also we have our partner organisations, which I'll come to a bit later on. So if we could go to next slide. So my interest in disability began with an interest in albinism, and this is something I've worked on since I did my PhD over 20 years ago now. The time flies. So albinism, a genetic condition which is highly visible in sub-Saharan Africa. And I was really interested in how albinism was understood and what that meant for people with albinism. As I was writing my PhD, which focused on literature, literary representation, news started to come through of the attacks on people with albinism for their body parts, which continue to today. And so I've become very actively involved in albinism networks and collaborations. So my interest in explanations for disability and their impact is what underpins this project on disability more broadly. When my CI Elvis and I were talking about our project in the very early days, it started as a project on albinism, and then we thought, well, a lot of these things that we're talking about only in relation to albinism affect people with many different disabilities, many impairments, and so we should open it up. And it's become very apparent to us that many of the beliefs attached to albinism are also attached to other disabilities as well. That said, there is a whole debate, which I won't go into now, about whether or not albinism is a disability. I would argue very strongly that it is, not least because of visual impairment and vulnerability to skin cancer, but also because of the socio-cultural lack of accommodation in communities and workplaces and schools and so on. So if we move on, then why this project? Well, this project was inspired really by an understanding from our work on albinism that many of the discourses about disability are created in the global north and very far removed from the realities of people's lives in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is something that Brigitte Roeder talks about in her 2018 report, when she says that a lack of understanding and awareness about the causes of disabilities and their resulting characteristics is a key factor in the stigma experienced by people with disabilities. But we also noticed that there were gaps in disability scholarship, and this remains the fact that a lot of the scholarship on disability is from the global north, even when it is focusing on the global south. So this is something we felt we should start to address as well. So our project set out to provide more nuanced understandings of disability in sub-Saharan Africa, to underline the importance of different experiences, different understandings of disability and how they impact people in different contexts. So next slide, please. So our project team is mostly made up of people with disabilities. And in all our activities, we've really tried to foreground the voices of disabled persons. And you'll see that as we come towards when I talk a bit more about our outputs from our project. So if you just click through, I think there are about 5 clicks here. So these are the initial questions that we started out with. And they seem very simple, but many of them just haven't really been addressed with any rigour. What does it mean to be disabled in sub-Saharan Africa today? What explanations are given for disability? What impact do those explanations have for disabled persons, for their families and communities? Is there good awareness of the impact of these explanations among NGOs, government, policymakers? And what is the role of the arts in making visible and also in undoing harmful explanations? So we've carried out more than 80 fieldwork interviews in Cameroon, Nigeria and South Africa. We did work with adults aged 18 to 90, and we also organised a set of creative workshops, interventions, exhibitions and other activities alongside these fieldwork interviews. And some of the people that we've worked with are pictured on this slide from the 3 different countries. And I mean, the stories were incredible. We have a huge set of incredible data that will keep us going for many years in terms of our academic outputs. So if I could just move on then, what is it that we mean by alternative explanations? So by alternative explanations, we're interested in how disability is understood. And these explanations run across a whole spectrum, from misunderstandings and assumptions that people make, through medical determinist explanations they're focused on a cure or on improving someone's medical outcomes, but often don't see the person in all that. And they also include traditional, religious, or supernatural beliefs, which of course all intersect. And we found that many of these beliefs are found, they're held in simultaneously, they intersect with each other, and they have different impacts on people with disabilities. They can result in a labelling of people in regard to their disability, that they're not seen as a person first. They can lead to stigma, discrimination, and marginalisation. And in some cases, they lead to harm, and that can be verbal, psychological harm, but it can also be physical abuses. However, we started with this term alternative explanations, and we've moved towards an idea of inclusive explanations. And the reason for that is that we found that many of these explanations that from the outside might seem to be harmful or negative, actually people often embrace them as a way of explaining to themselves, to their community, their disability, or of challenging people about disability and how it's perceived. So they can actually be really useful explanations in that regard. So if we just move on to the next slide, sorry, I think I've skipped that one. Let's move on to the next one. So these are some of the stories that we've heard from our participants. So this is an example of a story that came from a young man called Maxwell. He's 31 and lives in Cape Flats in South Africa. And he lives in a township and is a wheelchair user. And he talked about how difficult that was. He says, living in the township is not easy. It's difficult. The place is muddy, too many people. The houses are close to each other. It's really not healthy for a person with a wheelchair. But I grew up here. This is the only place that I know. So I'm kind of used to it. People seem like they don't understand, or they don't want to accept people living with disability. What I observed is that when you're disabled, people just take you for granted. Even if you're there with your friends and you're speaking, your voice is not heard like a normal person. And what was striking about Maxwell is that he's a young man who only recently became disabled in a car accident and is paraplegic. And so he sees his position as a disabled person as someone who was previously able-bodied. And that was quite an interesting position that he adopts. The next one then. So stigmatization is something that also came through really strongly in our interview. So Pierre, who's 34, works in the media in Yaoundé, and he has sickle cell. And he said sickle cell children have always been stigmatized. Some said I was the sort of child that brought bad luck, and they asked my mother to leave me in a field so that I could die. And so what was really interesting was the way he talked about his experience at school, but also how the population in general perceived of sickle cell and what that meant for him as someone who has this condition. And then the next slide, we found that often people experience conflicting explanations, that they're given different explanations for disability. So this is the example of Ernestine, who's a kerosene seller in Yaoundé. And she has epilepsy, and she told us of the experience of having to prove to people around her that she has epilepsy by carrying her medication with her to try to counter some of the other explanations that are put forward by the community, such as supernatural explanations that epilepsy is linked to witchcraft, for example. And she says there's this particular neighbour who makes life very difficult. She says the house opposite there, the lady said it clearly isn't epilepsy, but gives it mystical explanations. The sickness or epilepsy I'm going through isn't the main thing, but the illness is linked to witchcraft. And then the very last one is about the importance of faith and how faith can be both challenging for people with disabilities, but also it can be a means of explaining and accepting their situation. So Bello, who is a 41-year-old craft worker from Nigeria, said, you know, in Nigeria, we mostly believe that when things are happening like this blindness, it comes from the family or whatever. And he talks about how he went to a spiritualist, and then later on in his story, he sought medical help from a hospital, and they just told him that he was blind, he's lost his sight. And then it was a process of him coming to terms with that situation. So if we move on, so the project's unfolded in two different ways. So the first stage looked at the impact of beliefs on people with disabilities, as I've already shared. Historical prejudice and inadequate information have largely contributed to beliefs which have become very ingrained in society about disability. But people with disabilities in African contexts also face explanations that disability is the result of a curse or a punishment or a fault in their own life or that of their parents, or symbolic of special powers, which can also make them vulnerable to things like ritual abuse. Also, on a different level, in schools, in workplaces, in communities, a lack of understanding or a particular understanding of disability can prevent inclusion and be a barrier to people. So that was the first stage of the project. But out of our first stage focus interviews, we spoke to participants very broadly about the question of inclusion. And what came out in the answers to one particular question about inclusion was that one space where people were not included was in the healthcare space. And this is something that informed the second stage of our project. So in our fieldwork interviews, 72% of our participants reported negative experiences. And these range from misdiagnosis through to inaccessible explanations of medical conditions, to rude or harsh treatment, to blame, and also to a lack of empathy from the healthcare providers. A further 20% of our participants had never accessed the formal health system, but they turned instead to traditional healers or witch doctors, who had often ascribed their impairments to some kind of fault or a curse or misfortune. And so this gave us the focus for the second stage of our project in 2023 to 2024. So I'm going to just move on now, which is the next slide, to talk a bit about the arts and how we've engaged the arts, because I thought that would be of interest to members of your network. So we've used the applied arts, meaning theatre, dance, music, poetry, photography, and creative writing. Initially, we've used these to open up difficult conversations about disability, but also to address harmful beliefs and attitudes head on, and also to try and influence perceptions and advocate for inclusion in a softer way. So our workshops, our 6 workshops over the course of the project, have been designed to facilitate dialogue between people who would not normally have come together and had that conversation. They've aimed to raise awareness and also to explore these different understandings of disability among people with disability themselves, their caregivers, and professionals, so healthcare practitioners, teachers, and other professionals. And our project, as well as using the arts as a way in, is also producing outputs that are based on artistic forms of different artistic forms. So if we just quickly flick through the next 3 slides. So the first one is an image of our colleagues who were at our latest workshop in Nigeria, which was held in Benin City. And this workshop was led by the personal narrative and storytelling as the core of this workshop. What we did is we brought a group of disabled people together on the first day, and they worked together and got to know each other, and gradually we used storytelling as a way for them to gradually share their experiences in a healthcare setting. And then later on in that workshop, we brought in a group of medical professionals, and the story was told to them by the group and shared, and that opened up a conversation between these different groups. And then On the last day, we worked just with the healthcare providers, and it was a chance for them to reflect on what they'd heard and to think about how they would change their practice. And we used creative writing as a way for them to reflect and to write about what they felt they could change or needed to change. Or some of them actually wrote about what they didn't need to change, which was just as interesting. The next slide is always colourful picture of our colleagues in Cameroon. So in Yaoundé, we held an applied theatre workshop, and my colleague Imelda Samba there is an applied theatre practitioner and just led this wonderful week-long workshop using theatre in the same way as the other workshop used creative writing as a way in, but also as a means of reflection. And then the last photo is from Cape Town. My colleague Cobus Moolman at the centre of the image here. And that workshop used creative writing and photography as a means of inviting people to reflect, but also challenging some of these concepts that were being shared by our participants. Okay, so if we move on quickly, am I right for time, Yvette? I can speed through a bit more.
Yeah, I think you've probably got about 5 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfect. Okay, so this one actually was this is a slide with a short video on, so I don't think we can play that. If you click on it, I don't know if we'll have the sound or not. But this is just from our workshop in Cameroon and shows the power of people coming together and sharing together in a song.
No, I don't seem to be able to get the...
That's fine. We can do that I can share it in another way. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so very quickly then, I'll just talk a bit about our outputs from this project and what we've done. So on the next slide, what we've done is we've moved this from a research project into now an international network. So we have over 1,200 members across Sub-Saharan Africa, but also beyond. We meet for regular online workshops, conferences, and so on. But also our network has become a platform for promoting successful initiatives. So examples of best practice by colleagues working at grassroots often in this space of understandings of disability. On the next slide, you can see one of our resources that we've produced. So this is a continuing professional development resource for healthcare practitioners that came out of our workshop in Nigeria. And we've included firsthand the words of our participants here, as you can see on that post-it note, just at the bottom of the page. And all the language of this resource came from our participants. So regardless of how we think about the differently abled here in the UK, you know, this was what came out of Nigeria from the participants in Benin City, that they wanted to use that term differently abled as a way of articulating their own experience. We've also created training materials for healthcare students in Nigeria, Cameroon and South Africa, which are working along similar lines. And then the next slide, just quickly, I wanted to say that there were lots of unplanned impacts as well. So out of our workshops, there was a new disability research network established at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, a new disability theatre group at the University of Yaoundé, but also spin-off projects. As people heard about the kind of work we were doing, we had an organisation that works in Sierra Leone come to us and say, we need to do something. We really like your idea. Can we adopt it and use it in the context of Sierra Leone? And in Uganda as well, we were approached by a colleague who wanted to work with children. And so this ended up being a very small, separately funded project, using drawing as a way of engaging children and thinking about their futures. And then the last slide is just about our work in progress. So although the funded project is finished, our work is continuing. We have an edited book coming out, which includes the work of lots of our participants in conferences and workshops, activating the arts to understand disability, and that's coming out imminently. We have a policy report that we're producing, which looks at alternative and inclusive understandings of disability in Sub-Saharan Africa, aimed at policymakers and trying to influence their way of talking about disability and responding. And also an open invitation to you all to take part in our next online conference. And this year, our biannual conference focuses on disability inclusion in African healthcare contexts, and that's on the 17th of June. So I'll share details with Yvette of how to register for that. And I'll stop there because I've talked a lot. Thank you.
Audio. Thank you, Charlotte. That was incredible. We have much to think about, and just congratulations on the work of the network itself. It seems to have done incredible amounts of things, and as you know, the work is continuing. So I'm going to invite our participants that are here to make notes if they've got questions, because I think what we'll do is go to Dae, hear what he has to say, and then bring these two very different artists, people, creative work together, and have a conversation and ask questions, if that suits everybody. Is that all right? If we do it that way. Okay, great. So I'm going to hand over to you, Leanne.
Thanks, Yvette, and thanks, Charlotte, for the beautiful work you're doing and for sharing it with us. So it's my pleasure, and enormous pleasure actually, to introduce Dae Matsuoka. And he's kind of really early or very late, and so really grateful that you're here with us. But just a little bit of information about Dae. He's a Butoh dancer and a choreographer and the director of Landfest. He's been performing with Sankai Juka since 2005 and has appeared in some of their major works. He's a founder and the director of Landfest since 2011, which is really a non-profit organization that has the purpose of promoting diversity and inclusion through performing arts. He has been leading the Scramble Dance Project since 2017, in which both people with and without disabilities create dance together. This inclusive project, initially instructed by Yoshito Ono, which is a legendary figure of Butoh, and has been continued by Dae Matsuoka, and presents his work both domestically and internationally. He's been to the Korean International Accessible Dance Festival in South Korea. He's also collaborated globally with artists such as Phantom Limb Company in New York for a piece called Falling Out, with Paolo Preston in New York also for Houses of Zodiac. And in 2021, he was the creator of the Tokyo Reel Underground, which is the Tokyo Festival Special 13 program. I know him actually because of his collaboration with Adrian Lutijn from Intradance in the Netherlands. And he was also in 2024 our Jomba Festival's featured digital artist, where he shared some of his work in a very beautiful program. So Dae, just to welcome you and to thank you so much for being awake and for taking time to come and talk to us about your magnificent work. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I'm so honored to be part of this amazing network that you have made. I don't know how long it took for you to have this network, but it's also it's a wonderful opportunity for me also to share my work, because now I'm in Kyoto. I'm touring with Adrian Lutijn that you just mentioned. He's a choreographer from Intradance in Netherlands, because in Japan, like, we are having this like huge national event called Osaka Expo, in which many parts of the world people gather to show like what they are part of or what they want to show to the world. So Adrian Lutijn and I been collaborating for this expo as an official program of the Netherlands. And this piece is called Unum, dance piece. And this is about intergenerational integrated dance piece in which dancers, not only professional dancers, but also their parents joining this piece. And some of the dancers have disabilities. And I would like to share from now on the documentary film about this piece and talk about it more. So can you see the video right now? Okay. Can you hear? No.
We don't have sound, no, but the
I think you need to
images.
share
Okay.
sound. If you go back and go out and then share
Okay.
sound before you, if you go to
Okay.
share
All
sound,
right.
then click, it should be fine.
Sorry.
That share sound is usually on the right. I mean, I don't know how it looks like for you, but on the right, there's a little button that says share sound before you go to everything.
Sorry.
Just take your time.
Okay. Can you hear? No? You can't hear?
No, no. If you
So
want me to try, send us the Vimeo.
Yeah.
Sorry, Yvette. Speaking
No,
over.
go for it.
If you want to send, if you just want to put the link. Do you want me to move forward a little bit, or are you good at that
Oh,
point?
yeah. I think
Is there
this
sound
part
already?
is, no, this part is silent.
Okay.
So, this piece is
You hear
called
it?
Unum. Yeah. And in Latin, this means one out of many. I think it's stopping. No?
Can you play? It's paused.
Okay, sorry, just a sec. I don't know what happened. Can you hear it?
Okay, yeah.
Everything running. It says my screen sharing is paused. Can you still see it?
We can see it, but it is paused. It's on pause.
I don't understand why it's paused. Just really sorry, but it seems to be something on my computer. It doesn't seem to work with what I've got going here.
Mm.
So the alternative is that we could pause all of us for a moment and watch it and then come back.
I think that's, yeah, because it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's clearly running for me, and the sound is sharing.
Oh, there what? It's going.
Yeah, it might
What's
be.
made us Kyodai? Well, first, he is a younger Kyodai.
Working?
We have been professional
Right, I just can't
dancers
make it full
ourselves.
screen.
I have been, and he still is a professional dancer. So we meet each other also in the artistic level. And next to that, you are experimenting like I am with inclusive casting. So working with bodies and minds which are not the usual or expected bodies on stage. We both have this fascination for that. Either be that mentally, physically, age, gender. I don't care about the dancers that I work with as long as they're good. And I think my Kyodai has the same thing. That makes, like, I feel we talk very easily with each other about those things. So, chimpanzee. Tida, tida. And yeah, but also make this really like an effort. I see you. 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Chimpanzee. 3, 4, 5, 6.
今回ランドフェストイントロダンス貞松浜田バレエ団という、カンパニーも一緒にコラボレーションしてもらっていて、そのバレエ団から、2名の、プロのダンサーの方が入っていただいて、でその方々の、お母様とかお父様とか、あとは大阪で活躍する森田和夫さんと、あとそのお母さん、東京からは、神原健太さんという車椅子ダンサーとしてね、すごくこう有名な方なんですけれども、その方の、娘さんと一緒に血がつながっているその親と子とのコラボレーションっていうところで、そういった方々に出演していただいて。
There is some, of course, there's some striking differences between the Netherlands cultural way of living and the Japanese society. But also that is something that inspires me, and it fascinates me too. But we have to find out things, I have to find out things about the way Dai is working, but also the Japanese caste, how they work and how the cultural difference there are. We spoke about the example that the Dutch culture, especially within families, is very physical, very much into hugging, and you know, when you meet people on the street, your friends, you're hugging. Meanwhile, Japanese cultural approach to that, or social approach, or customs are differently. So there is always something we have to talk about, and but also some things that inspires us. That sometimes was funny in the working that we found out.
日本人の身体性っていうのがすごくやっぱりある。日常生活のレベルでもやっぱり握手とかやっぱりハグとかってあまりしなかったりとかで、肉親になるとましてや肉親になるとそういうことっていうのは全然ないっていうところで、今回でも一緒にこう舞台を作るっていう上で、どうしてもこうダンスの作品ですので、すごくそういったこうフィジカルなコンタクトというか関係性っていうのが自分たちで主体的に作らなければいけないというところがあったりして、で、そういうのは僕だけでは引き出せないものがやっぱりたくさんあるなっていう ぱりそこでこうヨーロッパの方のこう視点というかやっぱり方法っていうのが一つすごく光ったものとしてやっぱりあるなっていうところがありますので、お互いのこう違いが見える中で一緒にこう舞台を作っていくっていうプロセスがやっぱり楽しいですね。はい。
私結構あれ意外でした。母は私の触り方はあんまりよく分かってないな。このダンスは結構、まあ最初遠慮するけど、途中から大丈夫になっていくのに、意外と母はそうじゃなかった。すごいケアをしようと。自慢するわけでもない、綺麗と思ってるわけでも、でも、やる子だから。だからこの子がやってることが間違いか間違いじゃないか私には分からない。障害持ってるんだけど、やれないことは悔しいみたいな。
なんとなくその2人のなんか求めたいものはなんとなく一致はしてると思う。でも今はそのこう話をしたりとか、そこでこう意見交換したり、なんかこうした方がいいっていうよりかはなんか自分は今これにハマってるんだとかっていうのをまあ話し合ったりするか。
親として出るだから、私はたまたまバレエしてたけどそうじゃない人もいらっしゃると思うからすごいな、まあだから、ちょっと弱音は吐けないなみたいな。
どういう観点で言うかもありますけど
どうって言われても
どうって言われてもっていう感じやね。この側から言われたらそうなんだけど、まあ楽しいけど大変って感じですよね。
親とかの前で踊るのが、練習で踊るのが本当になんか小学生の時にお母さんが見に来るぐらいやったんで、もうその稽古場にいるっていうのがなんか変な感じでした
お父さんめちゃくちゃ張り切ってきてます。
めっちゃ張り切ってます
舞台を見ることが自分がすごく楽しいし、で羨ましいなっていうところもどっかにあるでしょうね。舞台作れていいなっていうところもあるし、いやこうしたらいいのああしたらいいっていうのは常にやっぱイメージを持っていて、自分があの場所に行ったらこうしたいなっていうのはいろいろ持ってる。
I always treat all the dancers like they're professional dancers, so I raise the bar already in the beginning, and by doing that I make clear that I have expectations of them and how they are part of this. Of course, I'm not forcing them because we pick out people that would like to do this adventure. But once they step on board, then I like to expand possibilities. So I'm working with disabled or not disabled people exactly the same. I work as I worked as I was a dancer myself, or when I'm working with only the dance of interdance. There's no difference. And by setting that standard, you lift up, and everybody learns from everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Petra. Okay, so it was a documentary film, and we managed to have the premiere at the Osaka Expo the other day. It was only last week, and I'm very honored to say that it was a huge success, and I want to show you how we did it on the stage. It's just a picture from the Instagram, but this is a photo from the real stage that we made together. And it was amazing because, we had, 6 pairs of parent and child. And 2 pairs include people with disabilities. But, as Adrian was mentioning, we were rehearsing as if like we were trying to be a new family, and within this new family, we were reshaping the connections with each other through bodies, which was really touching, but also in terms of like reshaping the connections between parent and child, there was also a new drama that was taking place in this process. And then, of course, nobody was expecting that people just join this project to make a dance piece. But, it was very organic and then challenging, many phases. But we finally brought it on stage, and there was so much emotions, not only emotions, but also, reconnections among, one another. So I think, I just wanted to share this piece with you because we're in the middle of touring, and we just finished this. So that's it from me for now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dai, so much. It's really beautiful to see the work, and I feel a bit, like I've seen some of the photographs because Adrian's been sending them to me. So just really, really beautiful to see the work in progress. I wanted to ask also, which you haven't really spoken about, but I know is deeply influential in the way that you may work, is your own Butoh history, and how you made the shift from working in Butoh, or not shift actually, but how the Butoh led to your work in integrated or disability dance. And I'd be interested to hear a little bit about that.
That's an interesting question. Yes, but I feel there's some like commonality between Butoh and also working with people with different backgrounds, different physicality, because Butoh was born to kind of like rebel against existing dance expression that was imported from the mainly Western culture. So the founders of Butoh, they kind of looked at marginalized people like farmers, or like peasants, or like old poor lady. But like in Japan, there's a lot of like people in the very abandoned village, or marginalized communities. So they looked at people, and they wanted to see them as a motif for the new art and the new physical art that they were trying to make. That was the kind of initiative initiate motivation of the Butoh founders. And then, so I sort of think, beauty exists in every one and every one of us that has like different physicalities, different body. So in order to take out the beauty or to let the audience discover the beauty within these kinds of people, I think, Butoh, found a way to do that. So I think I have a reason to, connect with people with different bodies, and I haven't realized it until I, started working with these people. But now I see why I'm so attracted, because I see their presence and their, how to say, the struggle that they have with their, conditions, and their presence on the stage also connects with that struggle, I feel. So it's not about learning the some sort of existing choreography, but it's not only about that, but also about having your life, having your energy inside, expressed on the stage. That is important. So in that sense, dance can take out their energy out on the stage, and it doesn't necessarily have to something already formed by other people, like hip hop or ballet. It doesn't have to be categorized, but it can be more organic, natural, or interconnected with other people. And Butoh has opened up some aspects about that. So I think there's commonality. That's why I think so.
Yeah, thank you, Dai. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if anyone in the room has something that they want to ask Dai, or in fact Charlotte as well. And if anyone wants to ask about the work, Petra.
Yes, I have a question for Charlotte. And I mean, I enjoyed both projects so much. Thanks so much for both presentations. They're
Thank
really
you.
great. And as someone who's really interested in Butoh and in working with particularly Japanese disabled dancers, it was fabulous to see the project. Thank you. But for Charlotte, hi, Charlotte.
Hello.
Been a long time. I know we met before, and I've been teaching your work for a long time in my classes, disability studies grad classes, and it's fabulous to see where the work is going and this integration. I have a question. It's the question I always get from my students as well. So, and that is this differently abled dancers issue, differently abled people issue, which of course we all understand that many different people have different language preferences, but so interesting to me, given that the social model idea, the disabled people idea came from a South African researcher. Do you have an idea? Do you have any kind of, can you explain what's your explanation why people do not wish to embrace the more what we would call a cultural one in a global north context, the more political identity? I mean, it's obviously very easy to understand on a personal level why differently abled is more enabling in some ways. But it does seem like many of the people here have pretty strong understanding of disability as a cultural phenomenon or a sociocultural phenomenon. So I'm always intrigued by that. And I'm just, we're always having these long discussions about this particular issue.
Yeah, and I think we'll just continue it here. But I mean, our experience during the project was that in each context that we worked in, and I say context meaning not just national context, but even, between town to town, people have different views on this. Even individuals have different views on this. I've always pushed the social model, certainly in my work with albinism. That actually people are disabled by the attitudes of other people, not by a sense that they're not able to do anything. There are different ways of doing things. So I can see why people like to go for differently abled, but I think it underlines the difference rather than the similarities. And what I've really seen in my work over the last 20 years is that there are more similarities between people than differences. And that goes for, internationally, as well as between different abilities, different colours of skin, whatever those distinctions might be. So we went with differently abled for that resource because it was very much the wish of that group of collaborators in Nigeria, and they're now taking their project forward quite independently of me, which is brilliant. That's what I want to happen. And they're pursuing their own grant application for a future project that's looking at actually changing something in Nigeria in much more concrete terms than our project would have. So I don't think I've answered your question, but that's my response to your question.
It's a kind of unanswerable question. One would have to be an ethnographer in the room of figuring out how, what is the input, what are the internal discussions. Mm-hmm. I would find that so interesting to have someone track how a communal disability consciousness develops when people, if people are not together normally as disabled people, when they come together. I think that would be a very interesting research project, just to track how it looks. But thank you.
If I could just add to that, I think one thing I've really noticed as well is that in the different national contexts, there's a very different construction of disability. And I would say that Cameroon is very much in the sort of medical understanding of disability as an impairment, as something that prevents or hinders people from doing things. And, it's not helped by the French language using the term handicapé still, disability or disabled person. So there are all sorts of complications when we come to tackle that question, I'd say. But yeah, thank you.
Yvette, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's something that through every time we meet together as a group, and we had this in South Africa, there's this debate about language. And one of the real, I think, really interesting moments in our colloquium was when we said to artists, when do you use these different terms? And they said they use them in different contexts. So sometimes they use disabled because they want to highlight kind of consciousness. Sometimes they use differently abled to leverage a kind of sense of not being excluded, just being different, and different is not bad. And sometimes inclusive. But I think that there's a huge interest at the moment among artists to just say, can we just call ourselves dancers? And then what do we lose? Do we lose something when we do that? So there's been real debate about the leverage of these terms and when you mobilize them. And there's a real consciousness that it is mobilization. Mm-hmm. But there's also, from a South African perspective, the South Africans really use rights-based language and policy and everything. But there's a big gap between that language and the lived experiences. So we've got interviews with young people with cerebral palsy, and they just don't use this language. They just don't have that consciousness. And the hierarchies of disability and the struggles within the community that are fairly competitive, and particularly around those that are in special needs schools and those that are not. And there's a real sense that, and this is their terminology, this is the young people say, those that go to those schools are sissies. They're soft and they don't have any, they don't have any kind of backbone. So there's kind of real politics in all of these engagements and terminologies, but I also think there's competition, and that's around resources as well. So I think it's such an interesting question, and I think something that we need to keep engaging with, but also challenging, because often when we looking at people's attitudes to disability, we assume that is for the non-disabled publics, but it also includes the disabled communities themselves and how they perceive each other. And I mean, what I'm interested also, Charlotte, is how much your work has engaged people with learning or intellectual disability, or is it physical? Where is that in terms of the context you're working in?
Yeah, so I didn't really have much chance to talk about sort of future projects, but this project focused on physical disability, although that doesn't mean that there weren't people with intellectual impairments or other learning disabilities, involved in the project, but that wasn't our focus here. It was about often visible disabilities and their implications. But of course, then you have epilepsy and other disabilities that complicate that a bit. But yes, that is one way in which we thought we could take this work in future, because I think there are all sorts of really interesting questions there. Also, I would be really keen to look at this kind of model as a way of working, using the arts as a sort of intervention in a sense, in other contexts. So I've been speaking with a colleague who works in the Arab world, and he was saying there's so little discussion of disability, it's not really even spoken about often. There's so much need for work in that area. So I'm not sure which direction we'll move in yet, but that's certainly something we've been thinking about. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, language is political, and language choices are political. And when that's a conscious choice, that's fine. But I think what was most concerning about the work that we did was when people were talking about, say, their family or community's attitudes towards disability and how that was articulated, and, these kind of problematic understandings of disability. That's what we were trying to kind of push at in our project.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm wondering also, Di, just to pass it back to you, since Charlotte was talking a little bit about future projects, I'm wondering, I know you're in the middle of your tour, but I'm wondering, what happens after your collaboration with Adrian is over, and what's your next step?
Yes, I've told you before, but Landfest is aiming to, have more inclusive dance projects here in Japan. And in order to do so, I believe that we need to collaborate more with the inclusive dance companies or projects abroad. So I think in Japan, the scene is getting bigger, but also we need to kind of develop more by exchanging information or methods, or like sharing, techniques or, experience with the, companies or artists abroad. So we are now planning to invite in UK's community dance group called Dance Syndrome. And then Dance Syndrome has a unique methodology in which they are, training people with intellectual disabilities as what they call dance leaders. And they are letting them facilitate the dance workshops. And, we have some kind of bias that, people with intellectual disabilities are, kind of, the ones who are to take the workshops, but they Down syndrome, they have the opposite stance, in which people with disabilities, they can also lead the workshops, and they can be more they can have the ownership, they can have the leadership in terms of creating the space, creating the time through dance. So that's what they do, and I'm really inspired and influenced by the way they do it. So I'm kind of trying to introduce their methods in Japan. But I think there's more than 100 or like thousands ways to how to say let people with disabilities go out more and express themselves. So and also become independent and be connected with arts. So I think not only Down syndrome, but also like we can connect with more how to say artists and companies abroad, so that we can have better ways to have connection with people with disabilities, and to have the equity in this society.
Thanks,
That's my future project. Thank you.
I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing in this network as well is just sharing methodologies. A lot of times, part of what we do when we ask artists like you, and we've had Jörg and Jess and whoever's been with us, to just really speak about how they are finding methods and ways of working to really challenge these kind of hegemonic and perhaps colonially imported value systems around what constitutes training and technique. Because one of the things that we notice, particularly on the African continent, is not only is it difficult to find professional dance training, but also when it is given, it's really quite specific. And the idea of how are we talking back to empire, how are we finding ways to reconceptualize training and thinking about bodies and bodies training, and also that there are very few spaces in which dancers with disabilities are accepted into training institutions, and the idea of what does that mean, what does that mean around notions of so it's just really lovely to hear that you're also on a journey of discovery, because it's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. I'm not sure if there's anyone else who has Petra's put a few comments in the chat that maybe Di would like to speak to.
I can also read them out if there's no other questions. I just don't want to take too much time here.
No, please, Petra.
I just want to know, there's a bunch of people, like, I mean, I just intrigued. I mean, I found the documentary beautiful, and I love the intergenerational work. I thought that was great, and how you brought out intercultural issues around body habits and intimacies in the different contexts. So it's just beautiful. And as watching that, I remember the work of Nanako Nakajima. Do you know who Nanako is? She's a Japanese dramaturge who works with European German. She did a PhD in Germany, is in Japan, constantly works in Japan, works with groups in Osaka, in Tokyo, and has done so for over a decade now. So she is very interested in the kind of issues you're interested in. So I put all the names in here in case you want to follow up, because these are people who've have been doing it for a long time, and she also writes about these intercultural differences. It's very interesting. So she's one of these people who works practically in the field and also then writes as a dramaturge about them. And she also writes about aging. So disability is one of her topics because she works with disability dance companies in Japan and in Europe. But she also works a lot on aging bodies, Butoh and the aging body and dance and the gorgeousness that that is. And I also wanted to know, I just put in that name as well. There is a very old disability-led dance company who's led by a disabled woman. And the name of that company is Tai Hen. And I wonder whether you are familiar with them and what the relationship is with a company like Tai Hen and the kind of work that you are interested in, that you're working on. Have you ever collaborated? Is this a very different approach for you? Because Taihan has a very different approach from many global North companies that I know, but they are as old as the global North, famous disabled dance companies. And it's been wonderful for me to spend time with them, but it's been a long time ago. And I wonder whether you know what's going on with them. Can you update me?
No, I'm afraid I don't know them a lot.
They're in Osaka as well. Then yeah. And the
yeah.
leading them is a wheelchair user. I think if I remember correctly, she might be a polio survivor. Her mom is Korean, so a lot of her work is actually has it's disability dance in the sense that everybody's disabled. There are non-disabled people in this company. But a lot of the focus of the work is on Korean Japanese, the complexities of that engagement. So it's fascinating, really important. Yeah.
Of course, I heard about Taihen, but I think yes, we have different styles, and then
how would you call the difference? How would you articulate it if you know it?
Well, I think the leader of Taihen is herself, a person with disability, and she has maybe I don't know. Well, I don't know the artistic process of them, so I can't really define like what's the difference, but what's showing up on the stage, obviously it's different. So yeah, but well, I don't know. Maybe you know better than me, but
no, I've not seen them for a long time. I'm literally asking for an update because she was quite a bit older when I last saw her, so it's okay. I'm not trying to. She may also no longer be active. I really just don't know. It's over a decade since I visited her.
Yeah, but it's in general, it's really hard to be sustainable as a dance group in Japan. Not only inclusive dance groups, but also like professional dance groups. It's very hard to survive. So I mean, I really admire that Taiheng is they have been active for such a long time, and I'm really curious about like how they do it, and how they can sustain their activity, so but but anyway,
yeah. And Nanako doesn't work with Taihan. That's a different scene again. So Nanako, I think, would be more related to the scene that you're interested in. So
okay. I'll check it out.
Cool. I think it's always great to find who all the people are out there who are doing this kind of work. It sounds fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful documentary.
Thank you so much.
If I may pose a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I was just wondering, thank you so much to both of you. I think it was very fulfilling to hear both of your examples that you shared. And I was wondering along the line of methodology in the case of the research project and in case of the artistic work. I'm wondering what you would imagine, or maybe in the case of your work, whether particular methods that Charlotte shared, the storytelling part, the creative writing part, whether any of this was in your rehearsal process, played a part in any way, or did you only work, not only, but did you stick and stay mainly with with movement research amongst the intergenerational group that you worked with, and on the other hand, to you, Charlotte, whether more turning to the embodied part and the movement part, whether you would envision to even dig into the topics that you had been researching on, even from a different angle and perspective, maybe. If you would envision to that this might be an additional interesting aspect to go into in order to open up different notions about disability in your case as well, Dai. So in both directions, I would find this quite interesting if you'd like to share.
Yes, during the process of creating this piece called Unum, we interviewed each pair of parent and child, and you know, they have especially, you know, the female dancer with a disability and her mother. They really had a, you know, like struggling story, and about being as a, you know, disabled person, and about being mother of the person with a disability. So you know, by hearing their stories, you know, we try to kind of like you know, kind of create emotion that can lead to you know, very essential movements. And I think you know, by letting out these words that came out of their history, like individual history, I think they also, the dancers also got to know like how they kind of like, you know, create their move themselves. So yes, the piece was based on like these, you know, stories, the real stories that they have lived. And also, you know, it's important to have them have their, how to say, you know, like physical communication based on like these family stories. So that was just one part of the, you know, method that we try to connect these dances.
Yeah, if I could answer from my perspective, I think in terms of methodology, we went through a process, if I put it politely. So going into a research project, you have to apply for the funding, you come up with a methodology that appears that it's going to work. And it was led by our research team, the development of that methodology. And as I say, many are people with disabilities themselves. But it was only when we actually got to running the workshops that we found that sometimes those didn't work, that they weren't perhaps acceptable to the people we were working with, you know, that someone would come with a great idea and we went with that. So we were quite open, actually. So we found, for example, that with the Nigeria workshop that ended up being about storytelling, we'd thought that we'd use theatre, and then it didn't really engage the group of people that we were working with. They just didn't quite grasp hold of what was expected of them. Perhaps it wasn't the right facilitator or the right mode for that group of people. So we switched to a much more sort of narrative form of oral storytelling. I think the method that we used that was very different to the others was creative writing, because I think all of our other methods, like photography, dance or movement or applied theatre, all were sort of embodied forms of expression, and they brought something else. You know, they they were much more inclusive. And when we had our creative writing workshop in South Africa, we had 2 deaf participants, and we had people signing for them. And they said that they had never written anything apart from at school, and that the written word was in a sense at a distance from their own experience. And so what we did there is that they told their story, and it was kind of written down by a scribe. So that was a different way of working with creative writing. So I think what I'm trying to say is we had to be very flexible, but actually that really paid off, because a lot of our findings are not based on the concrete sort of written words that people produced or the images that they drew. They're actually based on our experience of having worked with those people at the time that we were there, if that makes sense. So in terms of our methodology that we started with, I think what we ended up with was probably, it didn't bear much resemblance. So as an academic project, there's a project in there in itself, I think, to reflect on what works and how you design a methodology and if it's effective in the long term. Yeah.
Thank you.
I see we've sort of hit our time, which is it's maybe a very beautiful time to bring it to an end. And I'll pass it to Yvette, but just to say from my side, thank you, Di, so much for an ongoing relationship and friendship, and for the beauty of your work, and also just to Charlotte for an extraordinary project and the learnings and the shared learnings around it. I found the stuff around health really, really interesting and beautiful. So thank you very much from me and from the network. And I'm going to hand it over to Yvette.
Yes, so again, thank you to both of you. Really, it looks like the work's so different, but really not, because we're all working in this inclusive space where we're trying to make connections, explore attitudes and understand the specificities, the local as well as the kind of broad global context in which disability sits. I just wanted to say that on the website, we've created a link to the Sub-Saharan Inclusive Network, because they've got wonderful resources that they made available, and they've said we might make that link. So, but also 2 weeks ago, I was at the UKRI have funded 10 projects that in my area of working. And most of those projects have said they would also be very happy to have their resources made available to everybody. And they're working mostly in social science. So things like training disabled research people to do research, young people, advocacy, so they're very diverse, but they've said they would be happy for us to post those links and share the resources. There was a wonderful one in Cuba where they're using local materials to create kind of suitcases to take into villages for people to work with various kinds of disability, but it's kind of sustainable resources, how you make those suitcases, and you also work with the kind of story, the kind of modalities of arts that Charlotte's talking about that people locally understand as well. So that's just a little flag that will go up on our resource page when I can get there to put it all together. And, thank you to people that are being generous about sharing the work that they're doing, and that these networks are networking with one another as well. So I'm very grateful. So thank you to everybody that has shared their work, and those that will continue to share their work in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So have good evenings or days, or have a nice sleep, Di, because I think you're past bedtime now. And whatever time zone we are, have a beautiful time. Thank you.
Thank you.